we going to do?
All right.
She's going to ask questions.
We'll start by having you say your name.
Well, my name is Ken Stayton. I'm from Eureka, California. I was in L Company, 87th Mountain Infantry, World War II.
And your rank?
My rank was private first class.
Well, there's obviously a few things that happened to you that stand out as memorable occasions. Maybe you could tell us about some of those.
Well, we set sail for Italy in January of 1945. We arrived about 9 days later in Naples. We rode up the Italian peninsula in Italian boxcars. One thing we learned as we went through the small towns, all of the Italian girls, when they wave hello, they go like this, and we thought, what a country.
What does that mean?
That means hello. We didn't think it meant that, but that's what it means, hello. Anyway.
Once you got to battle, tell me about.
Well, our first station in Italy is San Marcello Pistoiese. We were quartered there for, I don't know, a week or so. Went out on our first night patrols in that area, and of course we're frightened about that. Most people survived that okay. And then I think we moved into a battle around the 18th of February, which was the battle for Mount Belvedere, which I'm sure you've heard a lot about already. I believe we were in reserve in the initial battle of Mount Belvedere. We're 87th Mountain Infantry, 3rd Battalion in the regiment, and we were held in reserve. We went on through that battle and suffered several casualties. I was never injured, but a lot of my friends were, obviously. We went on from there to I believe Mount Della Spey and Della Torracchia.
In this time period, what's the most memorable thing that happened to you?
Well, the most memorable thing probably that happened to me individually, it was in the final offensive of the war. It started on the 14th of April, 1945, and we were, the 87th 3rd Battalion was assigned to capturing Mount Mosca. And I remember as we were going up the mountain, why the squad leader told me to take half the squad and follow a little road around the side of the hill. And he would take the other half and go around the other side. So we started down this little road, which is only 2 wagon wheels wide among huge chestnut trees. And I remember thinking, you know, gee, if I were defending this position, I would have my machine gun set up right down that road. So it'd be very foolish to walk down the road. So we kind of walked up over the hill. And sure enough, just over the hill, there was a blonde, young German officer. He appeared to be by himself. He was dug in a foxhole in the road, and he had a machine gun, okay? And he saw me about the time I saw him. I was leading half the squad. So he picked the machine gun up because it was pointed down the road and I was up the hill. He had to pick it up and start firing as he swung it around, you know. And I remember I got cover behind a rather large chestnut tree. And I looked around to see where the other 5 guys were, and it was like I was all alone on the hill. You couldn't see anybody there. And so anyway, pretty soon one of our fellows showed himself from out behind a tree, and I told him, I said, I'll cover you with fire, and you go down and see if you can toss a grenade into where that machine gun is. I said, okay. So I peeked around the tree, and the young German was having trouble. His machine gun had jammed, and he had his head down, and he was trying to free it. And I fired a few rounds right over his head, didn't hit him, and he disappeared. And then the young man went up and threw a grenade into, and this young officer disappeared. So we cautiously went up there, and pretty soon we saw a flag on the end of a rifle bayonet waving, a white flag, you know. And he came out. We were surprised. There were about 15 of them in a dugout in the hill. We got them all out of it. About 15. Yeah, right. Of course, they knew the war was over. They wanted to live and survive, and that's why they did that. We had had an initial artillery barrage, and that's what put them into the dugout, you know, to escape the artillery fire. when the grenade came in, they didn't want anything more to do with the fighting. That was probably the most memorable thing that happened to me.
Can you think of anything else that you wish you had said later?
Can I think of anything else? Well, we, Valley, and it was kind of a standing.
Let's start that again, sir.
We all marched down to the Po Valley, and there was a kind of a standing joke that we'd been in the Apennines so long on the side hills that one leg was shorter than the other, and all the troops walked in a circle when I got on the flat ground. That was a joke. Through the Po Valley, I can recall walking along the roads, and we walked the whole way up to the Po. And we walked that one day, we walked all day until midnight. And as we went through the little Italian towns and villages, it's May in the Po Valley, or almost May, it's very hot. And the Italians would be there with a large water glass of wine, cool wine. And they would give you the wine as you walk through the village. Well, every village was the same, you know. So we walked until midnight. We were drinking wine most of the day and half the night, you know. And we didn't expect to see any of Germans, and they sure didn't want to see us, you know. But we caught up with them at San Benedetto Po. It's about midnight. There was a brief firefight. I don't think anybody got hurt. The Germans crossed the river, and I think the interesting part of it was most of our battalion was probably inebriated, you know. Remember, they've been drinking wine most of the day. So.
How did that affect their fighting abilities?
Well, they didn't fight very good that night. They slept pretty good. They didn't fight too well. Not that night. Of course, the next day we had to cross the Po River. And that was interesting too, because when we came up to the Po, why the enemy was using time fire artillery, which is artillery that has a time fuse that's set to burst a certain distance or a certain time out of the gun, and it burst right overhead, so it's really very vicious, you know. And they were leveling this time fire in on us. Of course, everybody was down as flat as they could be in a very flat field, and nobody wanted to move, you know, but we still had to cross the river. I can remember looking around and seeing this gentleman come up, and I think he had a couple of revolvers, one on each hip. And it was General Hayes, the division commander, and his aide. And his aide was probably pretty scared, you know. And Hayes said, "Come on, you know, we're going to cross the river. Let's go." Everybody got up and went. I guess that's what you call troop leadership.
Good, that was good.
Is that all right?
That was very
German.
Wait a second. Okay, go ahead.
There was a reported German bomber that strafed us on one of the roads in the Po Valley. We've later heard that it was Americans that made a mistake. I'm not sure what it was, but the troops were strafed and bombed, and there was some fatalities there. You know, and it happened probably about 200 yards from where I was down the road. That was the only encounter we ever had from hostile aircraft. We had much support from our own aircraft. You know, they were real good to have around. So,
All right, 1 minute, that's it. Let's use it.
oh, they had a lot of what they call government remount mules from Fort Sill, Oklahoma, that they moved into Camp Swift for the 10th. And these were large animals, prime mules. They brought them in on cattle cars, and they had mule skinners to go in and put haulers on the mules in the cattle cars and get them out of the cars, you know. And the mules' ears were laid back and their eyes were red, and they were all mad, you know. Anyway, when the mule came down the gangplank out of the cattle car, they would hand the lead rope to one of the GIs, you know. Well, many of them had never seen a mule before, you know. They would lead the mule down the camp road, you know, and pretty soon the mule would start to trot, and they would start to trot with him, and he'd start to run a little faster, and they'd give him a little more rope. Well, pretty soon the mule was running faster than the soldier could, so he'd have to let the rope go, you know. By the end of the day, you know, I don't know how many dozen mules were running loose in Camp Swift, but they were all over camp.
Were you working with mules?
Hmm?
Did you work with mules?
No, I didn't personally.
Really? You are the youngest looking guy I've seen. Do you mind my asking how old are you?
Going to be 80 next Sunday.